So welcome everyone to the Kicking Your Imposter Syndrome into Touch Masterclass here today. Thank you so much to those of you who've joined me live, if you like, and a big hello to those of you who are going to catch up on this as a follow-up from today's conversation. So firstly, hopefully you can see my screen, you've got my slides in front of you there. But for those of you who I haven't met before, which is most of you actually, just to introduce myself firstly. So I'm Jo Jackson. I am an executive coach and I am founder of my business Pivotal Moments Limited, which is all about focusing on supporting and empowering driven professionals just like you guys to unlock your potential, to find fulfillment on your terms. My corporate career spans about 15 years in some of the world's biggest multinational organizations. So I've worked for the likes of Kraft Foods, Johnson & Johnson, Boots, and then most recently Mars, where I was the digital director for the Mars food business. So I climbed my way up the corporate ladder. And then if I'm totally honest, I had a moment of, oh my God, how have I got here? I'm not very happy. What am I going to do with my life? And I had that kind of rock bottom moment. And if any of you have read my most recent blog, it's about how you can use rock bottom as a position of strength. So that moment for me came in 2020. And it was at that point in time where I kind of said to myself, what am I going to do with my life? This stuff isn't making me happy anymore. I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel like the best version of myself. My confidence was completely knocked. I had that real sense of, where do I belong? Who am I? And it was at that point in time that I worked with my own coach and then decided that I wanted to span into or pivot into the world of executive coaching. So I've done all my qualifications, which I'm really proud to say. And here I am, having set up my own business, having left the corporate world just over a year ago. I've just celebrated my first birthday as Pivotal Moments. So thank you. So what's most important to me, though, is that I can support as many people as possible who have felt in some way in a similar place that I have. So with the training that I've had, what's really important to me is that I can share some of the learnings in these masterclasses that I'm putting on roughly once a month. So I've done some masterclasses on what is coaching in itself for anyone who's considering coaching. I've also done masterclasses on things like overcoming your limiting beliefs. So how can you kind of break that limit that you put on yourself? And then there's some future masterclasses coming up, which I'll tell you about later on today. It's really important to me, though, that you know that I'm just a normal human, right? I'm an auntie, a very, very proud auntie to two little poppets, one of whom gave me a sickness bug last week, but we'll move on from that. I'm a real fan of a Côte de Provence rosé. I have terrible taste in romantic novels, but family and friends are absolutely my worlds. They're the most important things to me. And one of the reasons why I changed my life and moved away from doing all things corporate and setting myself up in my own business was so that I could have that balance back in my life. So if you want to know a little bit more about me, feel free to jump on my website, which is pivotalmoments.co.uk. The first blog article on there is my story. So if you want to know a little bit more about where I've come from, where I'm going to, and the journey, the bumps along the way, please feel free to have a little nosy at that. So welcome to today's conversation about kicking imposter syndrome into touch. Now, a moment ago, I said to you guys, I'm an executive coach. Even still saying that, even with my qualification, even with my accreditation from the EMCC, which is the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, at senior practitioner level, no less, even saying the words, I'm an executive coach, makes me go like that inside. That's what imposter syndrome is. And if you have those moments where you think, oh, how is it possible that I am that person? Then you're absolutely in the right place today. So first things first, let's have a little look at some people who probably just like me, just like you, feel this way. So I did a quick Google. Yeah, these ladies are some pretty powerful ladies in the worlds that they operate within. And it's really interesting to me because each and every one of them has come out talking about their imposter syndrome, their sense of not really feeling good enough. So Emma Watson, her quote is, it's almost like the better I do, the more my feeling of inadequacy increases. This is a woman who is a BAFTA winner. She's a blockbuster Hollywood star, and she is a real activist for women's rights. Then bottom left, we've got Renee Zellweger. Sometimes I wake up at night and go, oh, damn, here we go again. What were they thinking? They gave me this role. Don't they know that I'm faking it? This is a lady who's got 2 Academy Awards, 2 BAFTAs, 4 Golden Globes. She knows what she's doing. She's pretty good at it. Michelle Obama, my absolute, I love her. She's amazing. She had said in an article when she was sharing about her book, it never goes away, she said. It's sort of like, you're actually listening to me. It doesn't go away of that feeling of, I don't know if the world should take me seriously. I'm just Michelle, that girl on the South Side that went to public school. And then finally, Sheryl Sandberg. She is COO of Meta platforms, so Facebook and Instagram. And she says, there are still days when I wake up feeling like a fraud, not sure I should be where I am. She also happens to be a billionaire, massive philanthropist, and so on and so forth. So I'm not being funny. Really, it shows that she does deserve to be where she is. And I suppose that's the concept of imposter syndrome. That's what we're all fighting against. And believe me, you would be amazed at how many clients I coach who feel like this. People who you look at, probably people in the organizations that you work within or the businesses that you work with, you look at them and you think, wow, they're pretty good. Like, I'd love to be like that one day when I grow up. And actually, these people are feeling exactly the same as you are. So let's start very quickly with a bit of a definition, if you like. What is imposter syndrome in definition? So it's an internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be, despite evidence of your ongoing success. So when I break this down a little bit, first things first, the first thing I notice about this is that it's an internal experience. It's happening inside of you. It's your experience of yourself. What that means, therefore, is that it's not actually necessarily real. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. It's about how you're perceiving yourself in that moment. Julia, welcome. Good to have you with us. The second element of the definition of imposter syndrome is that you believe you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. So you're constantly feeling like you're not good enough. That sense of someone's going to catch me out, that sense of feeling like a bit of a fraud. But the real critical bit that gets me every single time I think about the concept of imposter syndrome, despite evidence of your ongoing success. Okay. What that means is that there are facts, there's evidence, there is proof that shows that you do deserve this success, that you are good enough, that you have achieved the accolades, that you can do the job, that you can launch your business, that you can do the presentation, because you've got proof, you've got evidence that that is possible. You've got the success. It's like what I just said to you, me saying I am an executive coach still gives me the bit of the ick factor because it doesn't feel right to sort of stand proud in my qualifications. But I've got the certificates, I've got the stamps, I've got the proof, the evidence that I have got it. People believe me. So this is about me believing it for myself. So as we talk about that a little bit, I'd love for you guys to join me in the conversation for a second, jump off mute and tell me, in your experience, what does imposter syndrome, or how does imposter syndrome impact you? So how does it make you feel? What does it do to some of the choices that you make? What does it do to some of the decisions that you make? What does it do to some of the behaviors maybe that you show? So jump off mute, tell me, give me a little feel for how you feel you experience imposter syndrome.
I don't mind going first.
Go for it, Shannon. Yeah, talk to us.
It stops me from like taking opportunities that present to me. So I'm in a new role at the moment, and there have been times where I've been offered an opportunity to do something that perhaps I'm not quite ready for, but it's a really good opportunity. And, you know, the fear of failure and the fear of, oh God, if I do this and I'm rubbish at it, they're going to think I'm terrible, but there's no evidence to back up any of that scary thought at all. But it's that like wall you get, or like, oh, there's a new opportunity, but am I good enough for it? I know I'm good enough for it, but am I? It's like a bit of a mental.
And it's interesting you use that language of it being a wall, Shannon. So the idea that actually it's kind of, it's bigger than you somehow is the sort of perspective I get. It's almost like it's overwhelming, it's hard to overcome. Yeah, would that be a fair assumption based on that analysis?
Yeah, and then when you look back in a few months' time, once you've done it, you're like, why did I ever stop myself from doing that? Because it was fine.
Yeah, absolutely. So it potentially stops you from doing stuff. So it makes you sort of freeze in that moment thinking, can't do it, so don't do it. Yeah, cool. Julia, you jumped off mute. Do you want to share what you're thinking?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, apologies for being late. But yeah, I guess a couple of things. It makes me overthink, and I think it probably doesn't always make you perform at your best.
Okay, tell me a bit more about that.
Well, I think the overthinking bit is just, I think you end up running through things in your head.
Yeah.
You know, like probably overthink and over prepare, and the over prepare sometimes does work to your advantage. But then I think if you're overthinking it, you're not coming in as confident as you could, and maybe then you're not actually doing yourself justice.
So you're almost letting that overthinking voice sort of take over a little bit, almost like letting it cloud your judgment or cloud your approach, or maybe some of those sorts of things.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Really cool. Thank you. Rochelle, you jumped off mute. Tell me what you thought.
Yeah, I think for me, it is having to convince myself that I actually do know the answers. So, you know, if somebody asks me a question, I'm always very conscious of taking out kind of language that doesn't commit to an answer almost, because I kind of feel a bit like I think I know what the answer is, but I want to say I think, or you know, it's probably this, but let me get back to you. And it's kind of that lack of commitment, even though deep down I know that I know the answers. It's almost that feeling of, but do you, or are you just kind of faking it?
So you're almost like caveating yourself a little bit. You're almost like giving yourself an out in case it's not quite right, by saying probably, I think, or one that always comes up in like meetings and stuff is, correct me if I'm wrong, but like you're always giving someone permission to tell you that you're wrong even though you're not. So yeah, okay, Rochelle, thank you. Any of the other ladies want to jump in and tell us how imposter syndrome turns up for you? No? Oh, Callie, yes.
Yeah, I think for me it's about limiting myself, so underplaying things that are my things.
So what does that underplaying then do? What does that then?
It stops me from going forward at times.
Okay. Yeah.
Telling myself.
Yeah. So you might discount things maybe because you feel as though you want to underplay yourself, so you might discount an option maybe, or you might choose not to take an action.
Both of those, but also in terms of selling myself, it's not I did it, we did it as a team, and it's not accepting my achievements and part in that.
Yeah, so not kind of owning your space, almost not kind of owning who you are and what you bring to the party. It's a bit like, oh no, almost trying to be very humble almost.
It wasn't me, it was the others.
Yeah, it's a real team effort. I was only I brought the tea. Yeah. Okay. Saria, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I suppose similar to what the others have said as well. It's kind of always like double checking what I'm saying in case like it's not the right thing, whereas I see other people just shooting from the hip confidently and then it's accepted, and I suppose not being able to then present myself as confidently as I should, and also not being considered for opportunities then when I feel like I should be. And obviously that then nearly gives me validation that I am not as good as or I'm not good enough yet for that, say, next step or something, because I'm not being considered, but it's because of how I act and present myself.
So because you've got that kind of voice in your head, you're not operating in as confident a way as you could have done, even though you can do it, which then potentially means that other people perceive that you can't do it, or maybe means that you're missing out on opportunities, and it starts to then become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? Where that then knocks your confidence in itself, and you start thinking, actually this ball is rolling and how do I stop it? Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your different perspectives. It's really interesting that so many of us feel like this, but the way it turns up is slightly different for all of us. So that's one thing just to acknowledge. And Saria, you mentioned then that it seems like other people just kind of shoot from the hip and tell stuff. Actually, that's your perception. It's very possible that person's sitting there thinking, am I saying the right thing? What are they going to think of me? Have I really got the justification to have this point of view or to share my opinion or whatever it might be? So yeah. Okay, cool. So imposter syndrome, how it currently impacts us, really wide and varied, but actually, really interesting to hear how that comes through. So just a little bit of the theory, just in case, for those of you who are interested to know really where imposter syndrome comes from in the first place. So we are like icebergs. We have a very small amount of us that's above the waterline, and there is an absolute shed load of stuff that's going on below the surface that very often none of us really understand about ourselves, never mind about other people. Imposter syndrome is very much driven by some of those things that are below that waterline. So the first thing it's driven by is some of our beliefs. And then the second thing is by our drivers. So let me explain each of those different terms. So our beliefs, these, the ones that are relevant to imposter syndrome, our beliefs are the things that we believe about ourselves and the world around us. They're things that we've potentially learned through our upbringing or the cultural dynamics of our upbringing, but also potentially the cultural dynamics of the organization that we're working within, the certain ways that it's appropriate to behave, for example. It might also be beliefs around things like hierarchy. So the more senior person is always the most important, could be a belief, or the most senior person has the best knowledge or the most experience could be some of those beliefs. So beliefs are those things that we carry intrinsically inside of us. We probably don't necessarily know them. We're probably not aware of them because they're so subconscious and deeply rooted. But what they do is they trigger us to behave and respond to things around us in a certain way. So in terms of imposter syndrome, some of the beliefs that are relevant here for us to think about is, how do we feel about how capable we are? Are we good enough? How valuable are we as a person? How valuable is our opinion? How deserving are we? How much do you deserve that promotion? How much do you deserve that new job? So there could be some beliefs that are underlying here that you're carrying about yourself that's potentially undermining your sense of self-confidence. Beliefs and limiting beliefs is a whole other side of psychology and coaching and stuff like that. If you want to know a bit more about beliefs, I will be doing another masterclass on that at another point in time. But beliefs is a really fundamental part of who we are. The second element that is really important to acknowledge in this is our drivers. So what does that mean? Our drivers are our learned behaviors of how we feel we need to act for everything to be okay. So for example, one of our drivers could be hurry up. So I have to do things really, really quickly because that's the way that it's going to be okay. Or another one of our drivers could be, I need to please others. So for me to be okay, for people to like me, I need to make sure that I'm pleasing them. You can see, therefore, that some of our behaviors might be constantly putting other people first, maybe losing some of our boundaries, maybe never really asking for what we need. So again, a whole other side of psychology, which we can explore at another point in time. But let me ask you this. Tell me, how many of you sat here today feel like you need to be perfect or have a perfectionist tendency to feel like you're good enough? Give me a little feel of who feels, yeah, 2 or 3 hands, bang, straight up. Yeah, absolutely. Imposter syndrome, people who feel like they have imposter syndrome are often people who have those perfectionist type tendencies. I have to be perfect, otherwise it's not good enough. I have to be perfect for people to believe in me. Now, one of those things that is really important for us to acknowledge is perfectionism can be a really positive thing, but it's when we overuse that perfectionism and then our subconscious mind is using it to beat us up a little bit. That's when we start getting into this space of kind of imposter syndrome. So yeah, so 2 kind of basic fundamental elements of where imposter syndrome comes from. Firstly, our beliefs, and then secondly, what drives us to believe that we are going to be okay. So here's a question for you. How would you feel if you knew your imposter syndrome was actually trying to protect you? How would that make you feel? Does that surprise anyone? Does that shock anyone? Does anyone think, yeah, of course it is, I get that? Any perspectives? Your imposter syndrome is trying to protect you. Rochelle, talk to me.
I feel like that makes complete sense for me, because I almost feel like all these feelings I have of either I'm not good enough or I'm not as good as that other person who does the same job, or I do all these things well, but I don't do these things well, so I need to get perfect at those.
Okay.
It does feel a bit like almost protecting yourself from a fall, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Almost like the safety harness,
yeah,
that doesn't allow you to go too far.
Okay, cool. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the vibe that I wanted to explore with you guys today. Yeah, exactly that. So it's keeping you safe. It's potentially protecting you from something that could harm you. Effectively, our brains are very complicated beasts, and we've got the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is arguably the most powerful part of our mind, but it's not that sophisticated in the way it works. So the subconscious mind is the bit that does all the things that we don't even realize. You know that time when you're thinking about a TV show and you can't remember the name, and then three hours later you're like, oh, that was it, and you need to then text your friend and tell her which Netflix show she needs to watch. That's because our subconscious mind doesn't like allowing things to just sit there. It works on things behind the scenes, trying to get you the answers that you're looking for. So what it constantly is doing is scanning the world for potential threats. Exactly as you said there, Rochelle, like potential threats. What are the potential things that could harm me? So what it's looking for is, therefore, what do I need to put in place to try and protect me from those things? And if you think about it, that then plays into our fight, flight, or freeze responses, which is where our adrenaline comes into play. And as animals, we would have run away, we would have frozen in the moment, or we would have fought the potential threat, whatever it was. So those physiological responses we get from that imposter syndrome is all linked neurologically in our brains from how we operated as animals way back in the day. And that's where our subconscious mind is really powering up to try and protect us as much as possible. So those are the signs from our body, those voices in our head, those like the tummy flutters, the sort of the clammy hands if you're going for a presentation, feeling like you're not good enough. All of those things are signals from our bodies to say that it's trying to protect us. But the challenge with that subconscious mind is that because it's not very sophisticated, it can't actually sort of categorize these threats. So it can't actually sort of rationalize these threats for us. So here's the question for you. In these moments where you feel this sense of imposter syndrome, what is it that you're actually afraid of? What's your body trying to protect you from? So Rochelle, you said that fear of failure was one thing that you mentioned there. Anyone else? Like, what else could you potentially, your body be trying to protect you from?
Criticism.
Yeah. So criticism from other people, criticism from yourself, maybe?
Even, yeah, criticism from self, probably.
Okay, probably is there. Yeah. Okay, Callie, thank you.
Embarrassment of getting it wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, all of these things. So what are you afraid of? All of these things. So rejection could be one thing. So, if you're out on the dating scene, actually, I'm not good enough to go on that date with that guy because he looks really, really hot. Actually, what you're trying to protect yourself from is that fear of rejection. Maybe you're thinking about failure, as Rochelle was talking about there. Maybe you're thinking about other people's opinions, or indeed your own opinion, Callie. Yeah, exactly that. So criticism from yourself or others. But what about actually protecting yourself from the likes of success? So some of us don't feel as though we deserve success or happiness or to be able to reach our potential. And at the end of the day, Shannon likes that one. I can see like a moment. At the end of the day, our bodies are trying to keep us safe. And for some of us, keeping us safe means trying to limit down what is possible. We might not, going back to our beliefs, feel as though we are deserving of success or happiness or realizing our potential, because we might have grown up in an environment where the sorts of jobs you did were X, and that was the only thing that was open to you. And so, for someone who wants to then push the boundaries and realize their potential and do something different, they might have this sense of, actually, I'm not good enough for that. That's where their imposter syndrome comes from. So you can start to see that our bodies are trying to protect ourselves from various different things at play here. So let's get into it. How do we kick that imposter syndrome into touch? There are 3 key steps that I would recommend taking to help you to do that. The first step is, just like this little baby in the picture, see it for what it is. Yeah, when a baby sees itself in a mirror for the first time, they're like, whoa, this whole thing. That's what I'm talking about here when we're talking about imposter syndrome. So the first step to any solution when we're talking about anything is about awareness. knowing that you, or having a conscious awareness that that thing is there. So you can acknowledge that emotional response, you know, that initial feeling of that wall coming up, Shannon, that you talked about, or the idea of having those butterflies, or discounting yourself, or when you start hearing that voice, if you acknowledge it for what it is, all of a sudden that emotional response goes down. You take away some of that fierceness of that emotional response. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, the subconscious brain is effectively reacting in that emotional way. So if you can try and move it into the more conscious by being aware of it, you can get a more rational, logical response to it. So it takes the control away from your subconscious emotional mind and puts it into your rational, conscious mind. And by doing that, you can then choose how you want to deal with it. Are you going to let it do its thing? Are you going to acknowledge parts of the good that it brings, or are you going to discount it completely? You're then back in control rather than being at the mercy of your unconscious or subconscious mind. And there are different ways that you could potentially acknowledge your imposter syndrome. And it really depends kind of what works for you as an individual. If you're a writer like me, I love scribbling. So grabbing your journal, grabbing your diary, maybe making some notes around that emotion as it comes up. That's a really powerful way of taking it out of the head and externalizing it for you to help give you some perspective. It might be that you're like a voice notes kind of person, you know, sending yourself a voice note, doing a quick video on your phone, talking to a friend or a loved one that you trust. All of these things can help you to get it out of the head and actually start to externalize it a little bit. So first things first, acknowledge it. So when you feel that emotion rising up, just take a breath, take a moment and acknowledge it for what it is. That will put a bit of a pin in it, and that will help you to sort of take away some of its control. And then the second thing is, and this is a kaleidoscope, look at this, don't everyone remember kaleidoscopes? Amazing. So reframe the message that you're hearing. So a minute ago, I said to you that actually your imposter syndrome is trying to protect you. It's trying to help you in some way. So actually, what are the reasons why that emotion, why that feeling has come up? So, you know, is it about it's trying to protect you, to motivate you in a certain way? Is it trying to encourage you to prepare more? Is it trying to encourage you to practice your presentation? What is it trying to do that actually makes it a positive message? So rather than always thinking of it as being really critical and negative and trying to drag you down, how can you reframe it to acknowledge that that is there to protect you, to help you in some way? And then finally, and this is what we're going to play with a little bit now, is giving your imposter syndrome an identity. So I don't know about you, but when I get those moments of, ooh, it feels a bit uncomfortable, it feels really unquantifiable. It feels like it's bigger than me. It feels like it's hard to sort of face up to it. And in return, that therefore makes me feel little. It makes me feel powerless. It makes me feel overwhelmed. I don't know if there's some of the emotions that you then feel when you're having these moments of imposter syndrome. So one of my recommendations is to really think about giving your imposter syndrome an identity. So for example, what do they look like? What are they called? Whose voice is it that you can hear? Now, this is a really important one to think about. So whose voice is it that you can hear, and what does it sound like? Very often our imposter syndrome, because it's derived from our beliefs and our drivers, a lot of which come from prior experience in our lives, often we can hear a voice that we might recognize. So is it that teacher that said to you, you'll never be good enough? Is it that parent who said something? Is it that kid in the playground who taunted you with some comment or other? Whose voice is it that you can hear when your imposter syndrome is starting to get into gear? And then critically, how much do you respect that voice? How much do you respect that voice? Because actually, if we're giving credit and credence to a voice that we don't respect, it's having an impact on us. It's hurting us in a way that it doesn't deserve to. Just think about whose voice is it, or what does that voice sound like, and how much do we actually respect that voice? And then also, what are the words, statements, or comments that you hear from that voice the most? There's probably going to be some consistency with the types of things that this voice says to you. So actually what you can start thinking about is, if there are 5 or 6 or 7 different statements or comments that this voice constantly says to you, you can actually start A, acknowledging them better, but B, we can then think about how we can respond to those. So what's the benefit of doing this? Firstly, it externalizes that voice. So again, it's taking it away from that emotional response that we talked about, but it's also getting it out of your head into the external. It removes that feeling of it being overwhelming. It removes that feeling of it being inside of you trying to hurt you, and effectively makes it sort of a third party, depersonalizes it from your own personal experience. And therefore what it can do is it can distance you from the impact of those words. Okay, so just have a little think, like what's the benefit it could potentially give you to give your imposter syndrome a persona or an identity? Just think about what that could do for you as a potential solution. And then finally, step 4 is thinking about, actually, as a consequence of understanding their identity, how do we want them to see you? How do you want them to see you? So this is about being really aware of your superpowers. Okay, so what are your superpowers? Now, what do I mean by this? It might sound quite a flippant comment, and I don't mean it to be at all, but there are things that each of us do that are unique to us. So is your superpower a blend of empathy and compassion with, being able to cut through the noise to get to decision making? Is your superpower about being flexible? Is your superpower about bringing people with you? Is your superpower around the organization that you've got, or the qualification or the experience you've got of a certain task? Is your superpower the subject knowledge that you're doing that presentation on? Is your superpower the creativity that you do your tasks with? What is it that makes you you, that's truly your superpower? And therefore, what are the strengths that you could use to fight off this persona of this imposter syndrome that you created already? Then thinking about what they're saying to you. So a moment ago, I talked about what the words, the comments, the statements that this imposter syndrome persona is saying to you. Really think about what it is that they're saying to you. Where is the evidence that what they're saying to you is true? Where is the evidence that what they're saying to you is true? And actually, if you think about that, what do you know to be true? So if they're saying to you, you can't do that presentation, what do you know to be true about the last times you did a presentation? Or you can't say that you're an executive coach. What do I know about every time I say to people I'm an executive coach? It adds credibility. People believe me because I've got the proof, the evidence that says that that's the case. So think about, what are those comments? What are those words that you're hearing? And actually, what do you know the truth to be? So going back to this idea that imposter syndrome is you feeling these things about yourself despite the evidence to the contrary. So what's the evidence? What's the proof that you know to be true? And then what could you use to show your imposter syndrome persona that what they're saying isn't true? What is that evidence? Is it the client you won? Is it the deal you did? Is it the presentation you did? Is it the test that you overcame? What are those things that prove, what are those specific points of evidence that you can use to help you to prove these the imposter syndrome wrong? And one of my hints and tips on that is to keep a bit of a brag file. This is something that we used when I was at Johnson & Johnson. A brag file is really printouts of all those little things that make you happy. So it might be your feedback from people, it might be lovely words from people, it might be qualifications, whatever it might be, that in your quieter moments deep down you're like, I'm really proud of that. It might be some pictures of an event that you hosted, whatever it might be, that just gives you the opportunity to say, yeah, I'm proud of that. And in these moments, you can use that brag file as the opportunity just to remind yourself just how good you are. So what are those pieces of evidence that you could potentially use? And then think about the types of language that you could potentially throw back at your imposter syndrome persona, whatever this identity is. So for example, you could say, thank you, imposter syndrome. I hear you and know you're trying to protect me, but I'm okay. How could you try and talk to your imposter syndrome and show them that you're okay? How could you talk to that persona in a way that really takes back the control? And then finally, how could you burst that bubble? So what could you do to take their power away? So how could you distance yourself from the thought of that imposter syndrome? Okay, I don't deserve this promotion. What you could think in that moment, I noticed that my imposter syndrome is saying to me that I don't deserve this promotion. That's making me feel as though I don't deserve this promotion, or I'm feeling that I am, lacking in confidence. Bless you, Julia. What you can then do is think about, okay, if you acknowledge it in that third person, again, it just depersonalizes it. It takes away some of the pain, some of the pressure of that. So taking that moment of acknowledgement and then, distancing yourself, I notice the imposter syndrome is making me feel this way. Just takes that pressure off that emotion. Okay, so 4 key steps there to think about how you could take away some of that pressure from an imposter syndrome point of view. What I'm going to do now is just put you into a couple of groups, and we're going to give your imposter syndrome an identity. So I'm going to put you into a couple of breakout rooms just so you can work together, have a little chat amongst like-minded people and share your perspectives. We'll take 10 minutes here to do this. It's time for you to give your imposter syndrome its own identity. Okay. Now, don't worry if you're not an artist. The reason I put a picture of Cyril Sneer on this slide where I talked about my imposter syndrome is because this was my version of what I'm asking you to do. Now, as you can tell, art is not a strength of mine. I was actually encouraged not to take art at GCSE, as you can tell. So this is my identity. This is my persona of imposter syndrome in me. So my imposter syndrome, I've called him Narky Nigel. If you're from Nottinghamshire, you might know the word narky, but otherwise it might not. Basically, is someone who's miserable. He, as you can see there, he's got a really long pointy nose. He's got a horrible mole above his lip. He's got a downturning mouth, but he's big. You'll notice the way I've drawn him is big compared with me, who I see, because I see that I'm little in comparison. What you'll notice as well is that there's rain clouds, there's loads of rain, there's thunder and there's lightning. And the things that he's saying to me are, you're not enough, you're not good enough, do more, do better, and so on and so forth. So what you can see is that actually, you can see that I've sort of depicted how my imposter syndrome could potentially look. So that's what I'm going to ask you guys to do now. So we've had a couple of people drop off the call, but for those, oh, sorry, you need to go as well. This is because no one wants to do the activity. I'll tell you what, we'll keep everyone together in the main room, given there's only a couple of you left. So yeah, so just take a few minutes. What I want you to do is just have a little play and draw your imposter syndrome persona, and then we'll have a little chat about them in a second.
Just yesterday morning, they let me know you were gone. Suzanne, the plans they made put an end to you. I walked out this morning and I wrote down this song. I just can't remember who to send it to. I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend. But I always thought that I'd see you again. Won't you look down upon me, Jesus? You gotta help me make a stand. Just got to see me through another day. My body's aching and my time is at hand. I won't make it any other way. Whoa, I've seen fire and I've seen rain, seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend, but I always thought that I'd see you again. Been walking my mind to an easy time, my back turned towards the sun. Lord knows when the cold wind blows, it'll turn your head around. Well, there's hours of time on the telephone line to talk about things to come. Sweet dreams and flying machines in pieces on the ground. Whoa, I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend, but I always thought that I'd see you, baby, one more time again now. Thought I'd see you one more time again. There's just a few things coming my way this time around now. Thought I'd see you, thought I'd see you.
I'm gonna ask you to stop there. Looks like there's some artist masterpieces coming together here, which is amazing. So if you're happy to, I'd love to see what you guys have created to depict or to give a persona to your imposter syndrome. Having shared with you Nike Nigel, I'm sure that the standard is, you know, equally as good. So is anyone willing to share theirs?
I don't mind sharing.
Go for it, Rochelle.
I'm not an artist.
Are you in my camp, Rochelle?
Oh, 100%, Joe. So I don't know if you can see this.
Oh, yours is better than mine. Nice.
My imposter, I think, has had some dodgy lip fillers.
Okay. And how did it feel like giving your imposter syndrome an identity? What did it do for you?
I'm good, because I think, like, if I can kind of imagine that as a person and another person saying all those things to me, I would just think they were a horrible person. And,
okay,
you know, I wouldn't necessarily listen to their opinion, because I'd be thinking, no, actually,
yeah,
I do know these things, and the things that you're saying aren't true. But interestingly for me, I think my imposter syndrome would definitely be a woman, which, like, that just came instinctively, and I thought that was quite interesting.
Okay, interesting. And don't share with us who you think it might be necessarily, but can you imagine it being someone that you know, or their traits from someone you know, or is it just a generic? I think
almost like lots of different little parts of people almost, and not necessarily like examples that people have shown, but almost the perception of maybe certain people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I noticed you got some speech bubbles there as well, so you've got like the statements and the words and things like that that your imposter syndrome might use.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Callie, you jumped off mute as well. Are you happy to share your imposter syndrome?
Yeah. Not necessarily I'm preempting this, not an artist, just like you.
Okay.
And also it is a person. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So it's not a person necessarily, but the whole square, jagged edges, all of that bit was something for me. And also this idea, but if it was a person, I think it would be male.
Okay, interesting.
And the things that are being said are things like, you can't do it, you're going to fall flat on your face, you need to do more.
Yeah.
And no one's ever going to take you seriously.
Ooh, oh, that's like a little knife in my heart, Callie. So I suppose one thing that I would love for you to think about afterwards is if you hear that no one's going to take you seriously, what's your riposte to that? You know that moment when you walk down the street and you see someone who's really upset you? For me, it's my ex-husband. Rochelle knows exactly who I'm talking about. You know, that comment you just wish you could say to them. what's that thing that you want to say when you hear your imposter syndrome? No one's going to take me seriously. What's that put down? What's that bar? What's that response? You don't necessarily know. No, I'm not asking you to answer now because I'm really putting you on the spot there. But that would be an amazing thing for you to think about. So that every time you hear it, you just throw it back at it. That would really take its power away. So if you constantly hear something specific from your imposter syndrome person, identity, being, whatever it is, what's that riposte? What's that one thing that you're like, no, actually, this is who I am. Okay. Julia, Shannon, are you happy to share? Don't feel under any pressure if you don't want to, but Julia, let's come to you.
Yeah. Oh my God. As you can tell, you've got a right bunch of artists.
Yeah, do you know what? I feel like I'm amongst my people here.
I know, like seriously. I mean, look at that.
That's amazing. I love it. So how was it for you, Julia, to give your imposter syndrome like a persona of some sort?
Honestly, I think it's really good. I could have. Yeah. No, it was good. It actually, I found it harder. Well, no, it was good. I found it harder. The things that they were saying, I had a couple, and then after that, I was a bit like, but it was a good thought process. But it was actually a really good thought process. I called her Negative Nelly.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
nice. And the alliteration.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it's anyone, to be honest, because I sort of feel like it's me. It's like frowning. It's frowning me with an angry, frowning me with sort of a scared look. Is sort of what I've drawn. Yeah. Obviously, it looked like me, as you could tell. Like,
obviously, yeah, I saw the similarity. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote down two things, but I like the idea of writing them down. I was like, the one thing I wrote down was, how did you get here? Or there? Yeah, like how did the accent be on you? And then the other one is, I spent my career in marketing, is marketing a skill?
Oh, that's given me okay. Is marketing a skill? So the voice is saying, was marketing really a skill? Is that what you mean? You're thinking, right? Okay. So then again, I know it is, but I've spent my whole career having to defend it, and so I think Negative Nelly carries that with her. Yeah. Okay, so similar to the conversation we just had with Callie, it's like, where's my brag file? Where's those things that I know are true about this? How am I resourced to have that conversation with Negative Nelly when she has a go, so that I can prove that marketing is a skill. Nice.
It's useful, really useful.
Good. Shannon, go on. Yours is going to be some like amazing artist landscape.
Oh, Joe.
Yes, Shannon, we've got a full house of excellent pictures. Love it.
Mine is like the human form of an eye roll. So I just keep like the iPhone emoji, which is like the eye roll.
Yeah.
And it's like a very apathetic, like, why even bother? Why? Okay. Very lazy imposter syndrome of why even bother if it's not going to be successful. Yeah. So it's less like angry and more like there's so little, like, when I imagine it, it's just one of those friends who's like, or we could just stay in and do nothing, or so there's no get up and go or drive. So
so I suppose that idea of why even bother, if you think about that, then how could you answer that question with, well, this is why I bother. This is the good stuff that happens when I make the effort, when I push myself out my comfort zone, when I put myself out there, when I go out rather than stay in, whatever that scenario is. Almost like thinking about what are those reasons.
Yeah, definitely. I really liked your brag folder. I think that was like a concept that introduced me recently by someone in a previous job who was quite senior up, and they were like, why haven't you got this in a portfolio? You've smashed this, you've done that. And I was like, it almost feels bad to brag about it. It's like allowing yourself to acknowledge the work you've done and not pass on the success to someone else. I think Callie, it was you earlier who was mentioning like, oh, it was someone else that did that. Oh, it wasn't just me. And it's like that resonates a lot with me. So I really like the idea of like a brag folder and like almost having this ring binder to be like, hello, Mr. or Mrs. Imposter Syndrome, here is all the stuff that's been wrong.
And at the end of the day, when I was at Mars, we introduced this thing called humble brags. It's a bit like humbly bragging about the fact that actually I've done this thing, just to take away that ick factor of feeling like you're not being humble or like you're being a bit too arrogant or whatever it might be. And I think sometimes our imposter syndrome can feed on that behavior of make yourself smaller, make yourself less proud, because, you know, people don't like it. Another belief, right? Another belief that we're carrying, that we need to be humble. So yeah, have a little think about how you don't have to necessarily show that brag folder to anyone else. It can just be something that occasionally you look at just to remind yourself of the good stuff. Yeah. Callie, you jumped off mute. Have you got something to?
Yeah, a couple of things occurred to me. First of all, about the brag folder. I'm older than some of you on here, but we had a record of achievement at school that we were encouraged to do and kind of keep all of your achievements together at the time. And I'm just thinking about that now, and we've got our CVs, but how many of us keep that up to date and there, you know? And the other thing is something totally different, but it's just occurred to me that everybody you've shown on that imposter syndrome slide are female, and we are all female as well.
Yeah. And definitely, so the research suggests that more percentage-wise, more females than males suffer with imposter syndrome. However, it is something that affects everyone, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from, no matter, you know, race, age, sex, anything like that. So it's definitely something that is prevalent, but proportionally females seem to struggle with it more so. Just going back to your previous comment about the CV thing, one thing I'd really encourage you to think about is how can you use your, if you have them, mid-year and end-of-year reviews as that moment to update your record of achievement. You know, so many times we sort of turn up at our mid or end of year review and just be like, yeah, I've delivered my objectives. But actually, how could you use that moment to open up the brag file, have a conversation with your boss to say, I'm really proud of the way I did X, Y, and Z this year. Yeah, it doesn't have to, you know, that's quite a safe space to do that, because at the end of the day, it's your end of year review. You know, that person needs to know what you've done. So actually having that, you know, having that moment where you sort of bring to life some of that stuff might help you, just thinking about how you can keep your record of achievement alive. Just a thought there, Callie. Rochelle.
I think something that I found really helps to almost take the power away from a bit of imposter syndrome is the fact that we've all said a similar thing around the kind of not being good enough, you don't deserve to be here kind of thing. And I found, for me anyway, that if there's loads of people thinking that, it can't possibly be true, because that couldn't possibly be true for anybody who's, you know, in a role we've all worked hard to get to where we are. And I think that's really interesting. And also something that Julia said about, you know, people kind of thinking marketing isn't a skill.
Yeah,
I think is a super interesting one. I was talking to someone about the other day, because I said it was almost easier when I was in commercial because I didn't have everyone trying to do my job. Whereas I find in marketing, people kind of think that you just like throw some pictures on a wall and post something on Instagram.
Yeah.
And don't necessarily respect all of the insight you have, all of the knowledge you've built up in that area. And it just makes me wonder how many people in kind of creative fields and marketing especially have that same feeling of, well, could anyone just step in and do my job? Am I that easily replaceable?
Yeah, absolutely. Julia, go on.
No, she's absolutely right. Like, I've spent my whole career in marketing, and I've been pretty senior in marketing, but that doesn't, you're absolutely right, Rochelle. There's no, I think in careers, particularly in jobs where there's no like right or wrong, no black or white, and there's a lot of grey, you have to like really lean heavily on your brag folder and your experience. And you know, the fact that you make it look easy and come up with an answer really quickly isn't because it's easy, it's because you've got 20 years of experience. Like, I could like come up with a brand strategy, you know, I could do like one meeting, but that's because I've done it like that many times. It's not because it's easy, but it takes a certain, it takes work to be able to acknowledge that and ignore your imposter to do that. And I think it is prevalent in those type of jobs versus, say, I don't know, like accountancy, where there's a clearly like a bit more of a black and a white and a right and a wrong. It's interesting.
Or something like doctors or something like that, who we put on a bit of a pedestal because it's like, well, they're qualified, they've got these credentials behind them, compared with some of the there's the careers that I think a lot of us come from that aren't necessarily sort of accredited in some way or qualified in some way. Yeah,
and even like coaching, Joe, presumably as well, you know, it's like there's lots of ways that you can
absolutely
you can have a coaching conversation.
Coaching isn't unregulated. Like, I don't have to have a qualification or an accreditation to be a coach, but it's really important for me to do that, to know that I'm doing it properly. But yeah, exactly that, you know, it's anyone can always claim to be anything they want to be, but really it's them being able to follow it up in the right way, isn't it? So
we all need to channel our inner American.
Yeah, yeah, get that inner American going. I love that. So we've introduced our imposter syndromes. We've given them a bit of a persona. So just a quick kind of recap then, the 4 steps. Firstly, acknowledge it. So take a breath, acknowledge what your body's trying to say to you, and automatically what that will do is it'll take it away from your subconscious and put it into your conscious mind. You can then make a choice about how you deal with it. The second thing is then reframe it. Try and think about, what is this thing, this feeling trying to do to help me or to protect me? So try and think about it as not being necessarily something to harm you, but something to help you. Then, as we've just done, identify it, you know, think about Nagy Nelly or whatever your version is of your imposter syndrome persona. And then critically think about how you can overcome those things. So we talked about creating those, you know, those ripostes, those bank of things that we want to say back to our imposter syndrome. We talked about creating those facts, those files of evidence, you know, our brag files that we talked about, to think about, okay, actually, how can we prove that we can overcome these comments? So think about each of those different elements. How can you overcome that sense, that feeling? So I'm really interested to know, based on today's conversation, like, what is the next step that you're each going to take? Shannon, no problem at all. Lovely to see you. What's the next step you're going to take? Rochelle?
I'm going to keep coming back to this and keep, every time I kind of get that feeling of you're not doing the right thing, or you don't know what you're doing, or you shouldn't be here, imagine it coming from a person, and then almost responding to it as if that was someone stood in front of me saying that.
Yeah.
And exactly as you said, Joe, just using my own experience and all the reasons why I should be here and why I do know what I'm doing, to kind of shut that down before it takes over and stops me from performing at my best.
Love it, Rochelle. Thank you. Julia, Callie, what's your next step? Callie, you're coming off mute, so let's go to you first.
How did you instinctively know that? Oh, did you see my hand?
I can see the amount of time I spend on Zoom, you get to suss people out quite quickly, believe me. Yeah.
I'm going to continue with this creating a persona, because I really like the idea of giving it an identity, but also anticipating what's going to be said. So when I said before, it's kind of like my inner feeling. It doesn't feel like sometimes it comes from anywhere else. But when those feelings come up, if this person's got a persona, then I can counteract that. Yeah. At the moment, you know, it's just kind of like in the ether.
Yeah, and it's probably all encompassing as well. It's probably all around you. Whereas if you can put it into a persona, like Rochelle was saying, you can kind of focus your attention on it and deal with it.
Yeah, or shut the door on it.
Yeah, put it in a box and chuck it away. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cool, Callie, thank you. Julia, last but no means least.
Well, no, similar funny to Callie. I'm gonna carry on with this lovely one, because as I started thinking about what was it saying, I felt that was like really productive, but I only got as far as 2. So I think there's more there. And to Callie's point as well, I think, and to what you just said, it doesn't come up in all situations, otherwise one would be completely paralyzed. Yes. So there's clearly, and I think by doing this, you probably would get to, okay, what are the situations where it does come up, and what are the situations where it doesn't, where I can just ignore it and get on with my life. And, you know, and then once you know that, I think that helps you then also like put it in perspective. So no, but I'm going to carry on with my, not the artwork, the word.
I love it. Do send me these, won't you, at some point? I love it. Okay, I'm really aware that we've run slightly over, but just so you know, the next conversation I'm going to be hosting is one around working out your niggle. So if you're feeling like something's a bit off, something's a bit not quite right in your life, that's going to be the next conversation that I host, similar to this that we've done today, which is going to be in November. So if that's something that's interesting to you, keep an eye out for that, and yeah, sign up for that free masterclass in November if you fancy it. And then finally, I suppose, if today has sparked some thought about other stuff that's going on, we talked about beliefs, we talked about drivers, we talked about the inner voice and all those sorts of things. If there's something in that you think I'd love to have a bit more of a chat with Jo, please do feel free to reach out. We can arrange a 30-minute complimentary discovery call and just see if coaching could help you to unpick some of that stuff that's going on for you. So feel free to reach out and let me know. But for now, ladies, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute joy to host today's conversation. I really hope you go and kick those imposter syndromes into touch, and yeah, keep me in touch and let me know how you get on with it. But for now, wishing you every happiness, and thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Jo. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jo.
Yeah, really
lovely to see you. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.